locked in, then come take my hand. We're rebels with a paperback plan.
Welcome, listeners, to the first episode of Booked and Banned, the podcast, where we discussed essential literature that has faced challenges and censorship. Today, we are talking about Harper Lee's timeless classic, To Kill a Mockingbird. And I've asked my friend Dave, and thank you for joining, Dave,
Great to be here.
to come and talk about it with me. So, Dave, welcome to the show. Please tell our listeners a little bit about who you are and what your connection is to literature and these kinds of books.
Well, first of all, thank you, Naomi, for having me. It's a pleasure to be here and to be first. A little nervous, but I'm looking forward to it. But first of all, I want to tell you where I'm coming from. I'm speaking to you from Iowa City, Iowa, which is the home to the University of Iowa and the Iowa Writers Workshop. And then also, people may not know, but in 2008, UNESCO designated the city as a city of literature, the first one in the United States. So I'm proud to be here in the Midwest, coming to you from here. But one thing I want to tell you, in full disclosure, when I was younger, very younger, I struggled with reading. I was in first grade, and I just remember it was a great struggle. And my father, he would get a couple books of short stories, and we had designated times that I would sit with him and we would go through it. And it was laborious. I did not look forward to it. It was torture for a young person like me. And we finally got through it. And then a couple years, something clicked, and I became an avid reader. So my father died when I was in high school, and then every time I pick up a book, I think of him and the work that he did. Even though I didn't enjoy it at the time, it certainly paid off. Um, then I served in the Army. That was my career. And during that time, I was able to study at Penn State University and then teach at the United States Military Academy, composition and literature, which it was a wonderful experience. And so my readings have been diverse. Growing up, we didn't get to travel much, but I traveled through books. And then I always looked for books that would challenge my assumptions, challenge me as a person, grow me, and stretch me. And so that's why I'm attracted to banned books. I believe Stephen King said, if there's a book that's banned, go out and get it. I'm not, and because that's what you need to know, what they don't want you to know. So I love books, and I'm happy to be here.
Well, thank you for sharing such a wonderful memory of your father. That's
Yeah, exactly.
really, and it puts me in mind of how Atticus taught Scout to
Yeah,
read.
yeah,
And we'll get into that more, when in our discussion, but that's really gorgeous. And then you and I met when we were both teaching at West Point,
that's correct. Yeah,
some years ago now, but
yeah,
we
yeah.
had a
Been
good
retired
time.
6 years. It goes quickly.
Yeah, yeah. So before we dive into the discussion, let me set the stage with a quick look at the book itself. Harper Lee's 1960 novel, To Kill a Mockingbird. It's a foundational text in American literature, and it's primarily narrated by a girl named Scout Finch. It is
Right.
set in the fictional, racially segregated town of Macomb, Alabama, during the 1930s. The story is a profound exploration of innocence, prejudice, justice, and perhaps revenge. The central conflict revolves around Scout's father, Atticus Finch, a lawyer who takes on the defense of Tom Robinson, a Black man who is falsely accused of assaulting a white woman, sexually assaulting a white
Right.
woman. The novel is a powerful, though imperfect, narrative on the necessity of fighting against racism in the deeply segregated South, demonstrating the moral courage required to uphold the principles of equity when an entire community is aligned against recognizing the full humanity of Black people. Through Scout's eyes, the reader is forced to confront systemic racism and understand the devastating personal cost of injustice. This book is beloved, yet it remains one of the most frequently challenged books in American schools. To Kill a Mockingbird has faced challenges in schools almost since its inception. The primary objections leading to its banning are not typically related to its central themes of moral courage, but rather the language used within the book, specifically the use of racial slurs and its handling of difficult subjects like sexual assault and racial inequality. Ironically, the very elements that force a necessary conversation about the lack of equality for Black people and other people of color in American history are what led to its censorship. Critics argue that the content makes students uncomfortable, but proponents, including ourselves, argue that removing the book shields students from confronting historical and ongoing issues of systemic bias and discrimination. Challenging the book is often a direct attempt to avoid a crucial discussion about
Right.
the inclusion of Black experiences in historical narratives and how a lack of equity continues to shape our present educational and social systems. It remains challenged today because it forces an uncomfortable but essential reflection on the past. So, with that context, let's dive in. So, Dave, tell me why this book speaks to you. Why did you choose it?
Right. I chose it because, Naomi, it was the first book that I was truly immersed in. I credit it with starting my reading journey. I was given the book as a gift when I was 12 years old. I reread it, I believe, in eighth grade, and it's one of the few books that I've read multiple times. And then just to let you know, I grew up in central Pennsylvania and what in an area that was not diverse. And while my family was not racist and I didn't see overt acts of racism, I was aware of hurtful stereotypes. I was aware of others and minorities. And so um, it was something that really challenged me, right? And so and especially popular culture, especially TV, this is obviously before social media, um, racism and stereotypes and bias, they were all over the place, and they weren't immune to myself, my friends, or the schoolyard. And we like to think highly of ourselves, but it was in the conversation. So this book introduced me to a different experience, obviously through the eyes of Scout. And even though I didn't know the terms at the time, it provided a framework for, institutional racism, for extrajudicial killings, and even mental illness and drug addiction that, appear in the book as well. So it caused some discomfort, reflection, and then, what ultimately many people credit the book for is an increase of empathy, the identification of feelings of others. And the one thing I want to tell you is in preparation for this, I read it again just a few days ago, and uh, it was amazing because there was things that I didn't remember. There was new things that I did learn, and that I didn't have the context when I was reading it as a younger person. And it still made me teary at parts. And so, if a book can still move you and have emotions where you're teary, what more can you ask for in a piece of literature? And so, I'm glad we're starting Booked and Banned with this incredible novel.
Me too. And I read it again for this. I think I'd read it
Right.
2 times before. And of course, I did notice things that I had not seen before, and we'll probably get to some of those things. But I think that's what makes a novel great, or at least part of
Right.
it, is that you discover something new each time because you are also a different person each
Right.
time that you're reading it.
Yeah.
Yeah, and
And,
it's all there. It's all
Yeah.
there.
And as I mentioned, racism did exist and it will continue to exist. But it provided a framework as a young person that I could go back and reflect on the work. And so it's incredible.
Well, and you mentioned empathy, and I think this novel is often taught as a lesson in empathy. So, how about you tell our listeners how Atticus Finch specifically models this principle of equity, which is
Mhm.
about fair treatment based on individual need, right? Rather
Right.
than just equality, which means treating everyone the same way. How does he model equity in his defense of Tom Robinson? Because he's a little bit reluctant to take the case.
Right. Yeah, so, I'm glad you mentioned that because obviously, Atticus is beloved. I think and when people read it, "Hey, I wanna be like Atticus," and, that is an example of an adult who gets it. But I think it's important to remember that, the book was set in, Alabama in 1935, Jim Crow, and Atticus was a lawyer, he was white, probably had, some disposable income, and so he had a lot of privilege in the town, and he was actually a representative for Maycomb in the legislature, and so he was a person of privilege that who had that privilege, and now what was he going to do with it? And then I think it's important to remember that he did not volunteer to defend Tom Robinson. He was asked by the judge, and he was reluctant to volunteer or even say yes because just remind the listeners that Atticus was a widower. His wife died of I believe a heart attack, and so and he had two school age children that he was worried about their safety, and he understood what could ultimately happen in a futile attempt to defend him. But he understood also that there was a different set of rules for a black man facing a trial and facing especially the crime of raping a white woman, and so he did that, but he insists on a deeper approach. So during the trial, he just doesn't simply claim that Tom, should be treated as same as everyone else. In his defense, which was a vigorous defense, is that he clearly showed that Tom was disabled, that he was unable to assault Mayella Yule at the time, and that his testimony was consistent. He comes across as very believable, and he never wavers in that. And then he's able to show the desperation and the isolation of Mayella Yule, which would be unusual. It's not something that you would want to maybe his peers would not do that, right? They would just kind of leave that out. But he was showing that the Yules were very poor. She was desperate, and like everyone else, she has sexual urges, right? And so she acted upon those, and then of course, Tom Robinson was falsely accused, and then one thing I really like, and obviously, if you read the book, you're familiar with it, is the closing argument, which is incredibly powerful. So in that is when that's the time when he specifically challenges that all men are created equal. All right. And so Atticus says that, all men are not created equal, right? They have different strengths, they have different talents, they have different opportunities. And so it's important to understand that in those circumstances. But the courtroom, he argued, is one place, right? So in a democracy, we're going to talk a little bit more about that. One of the hallmarks is an independent judiciary, and so that in a courtroom is everyone equal. We know the image of justice is blind, but justice isn't blind, and but he's aware of that, and he even addresses it to the jury. And I'm going to quote here: "I'm not an idealist to believe firmly in the integrity of our courts and in our jury system. A court is only as sound as its jury, and a jury is only as sound as the men who make it up." And it's important to remember that the jury was made up, of white men, and specifically poor white men. And you know, she makes that clear. So affluent white men would not be considered on a jury. And so the tragedy of the book that everyone is aware of is that Tom Robinson is completely innocent. That is proved to everyone, to include the jury. But the verdict was still guilty and the sentence was still death. And so uh, Atticus, in every dealings that he had empathy for others, and especially his main focus was on his children because he realizes change is tectonic. It's like tectonic plates moving, change in the South. But he had empathy for others, and then taught those lessons to his children as well. And his defense of Tom Robinson was vigorous and was kind of shocking at the time because most people would just do the bare minimum. He knew what the conclusion was going to be, the verdict, and he continued on. And that's why I think Atticus flawed, but he's still a great character.
Oh, he's a fantastic character. And,
Mm,
I also felt like I think I made a note of it. I'd have to figure out exactly what point in the narrative it shows up. But he's using the jury's own racism in
mm,
defense of Tom in a
yeah,
way.
right.
When he talks about Mayella and how there's something about, there was a code that she's violating
Right.
by trying to offer herself in a sexual way to a
Right.
black man. And so
Yeah.
he's trying to use that key point to
Hmm.
defend Tom. And it's also it it's never said, outright, but the clearly there's an incestuous relationship
Yeah.
that Mayella, against her will has with her father.
Right. Yeah.
And so that's horrifying, and nobody can say that out loud,
Right.
in the courtroom, but it's implied, I
Yeah.
think.
Yeah.
Um,
And then the
and the
one
tech
thing,
Go
yeah,
ahead.
the one thing, it was interesting where you know, the attorney, who was, questioning Tom, not Atticus, he was mentioning that, he got Tom to admit that why did he come in there? Why did he, do all these chores for, her? Someone who was white, someone who, uh, you know, her and her people, especially the very poor, probably hated Tom. He did it because he felt sorry for them. And so, that was really a point that, you know, uh that had to be explained. And so, because in the South, why would a black man feel sorry for a white woman? And so,
Right.
it just shows, the grinding poverty that existed, and what that leads to as well. So, just
Yeah.
incredible.
Yeah, and there's a point where Tom says something about how he wouldn't have entered the yard without being asked,
Right,
right?
right,
Specifically. Um, and that's because that was a black man's own sense of self-preservation.
right,
I'm not going to go into a yard with a white woman or with children without someone specifically inviting me. And,
right,
that's a sad commentary on the times as well.
right,
Um, so I thought that was really interesting, and I'm sure I did not notice that the first time I read
right.
the book.
Yeah,
Um, so the text includes a lot of painful and offensive languages, particularly the N-word, that does reflect the racism of the 1930s. But in your view, how crucial is it to retain the original text in schools for students to fully grasp the historical context and the obstacles faced by Black people in American society, especially under Jim
right.
Crow?
Yeah. I think it's absolutely essential to keep the original text. And, when I look at books that are banned, it perplexes me. Right. And, and especially on this one, so yeah, there was many racial slurs, but that has been a fact of life. And so, even growing up, and I think sometimes we think, oh, we can't expose children to this. Well, they're exposed to it anyways. They're getting information, so many sources that we can't control, right? I have, 2 school-age children myself, and so that argument is just absolutely, bonkers to me, right? And so, um and I think that the one thing is, with the slurs, racial slurs, is one thing that really struck me in the book is this scout. She would just, kind of flippantly, have a racial slur when she was explaining things, and then, she had to be told, why that's offensive, and so she learned not to use it. So I think the way that Harper Lee, introduces it, it's a fact of life. It's a fact of life in 1930, and it's a fact of life in 2025. And so I don't know. We don't need to protect people, because it's factual. And so, um, it's not harmful, and I think it's important. And so, and as I mentioned, I read the book when I was 12, in an area that was not particularly diverse. And, of course, at that age, you're not steeped in, I was not steeped in history, world religions, understanding of other people. But the thing is this book, well, it brings up controversial subjects. Well, there's controversial subjects in history. And so, and the thing that really struck me, as young, and it's important, right? I was not fragile, but that some people were not considered fully citizens or even fully human. And so they could be dehumanized enough where they could be murdered, for something that they did not do. And so, any altering the text would simply, if you alter the text and you say, well, let's just take out some of the racial slurs, or take out some of the some of the scenes that makes people uncomfortable. Well, how are we going to change unless we're uncomfortable? If you censor the book, or more importantly, if you would take words out of the book and change the text in any way, I think would just reinforce the inequity of minorities. It will be a crime if this book was altered in any way. And
Oh,
even you
yeah.
mentioned sexual assault. Well, it has sexual assault. Well, there was sexual assault. There was not rape. All right. And so, it just, well, people can't say, well, it should be banned because it talks about rape. Well, rape is mentioned. All right. But there's no rape that happens. So there's a sexual assault. But yeah, that argument just never flies with me. I think the book is incredible. I think I read it as a 7-year-old. It made me think, made me maybe a little bit uncomfortable, but that was a great thing because it made me change.
Absolutely. Yeah, and the assault is perpetrated by male as father.
Yeah.
That's the
Right.
implication. It never comes right out and says that. But,
Right.
we also know that in most cases of sexual assault and or rape, they are perpetrated, by someone that the victim knows,
Right.
whether it's a member of their family or it's a friend or it's a classmate or what have
Right.
you. So that's actually very real and still
Mhm.
very pertinent,
Right.
in the world we live in today.
Right.
Scout's journey is one of realizing the deep prejudice and injustice in her community.
Mhm.
How does this narrative structure, told through the eyes of a 6 to 8
Yeah.
year old girl, basically, help young readers understand their own responsibility in learning about the past through the lens of others' experiences and reflecting on our own biases?
Right. Naomi, that's a great question, and I think Harper Lee's use of the first person was actually masterful. And so, first of all, I just want to say Scout is incredible. You know, I I just realized why I loved her as a character again. Reading a couple days ago, where she's beating people up. She's sort of she can be a bully, but she can be a great friend, and then also she exposes things, and so. And she even challenges gender roles at the time, right? So the last thing she wanted to do was be a proper lady that was considered in the 1930s. But through her eyes, because there's much talk in the book about, well, it's important to get in someone's skin. It's important to get in their shoes and walk around, and that will increase empathy. But through this book, we're put in the mind of Scout, and we see her experiences and her perspective, and we're experiencing hers, and we're creating our own. How would we react in a situation like that? And I think Scout's a lot braver than probably I could ever be, and so I just really appreciate the use of the first person in that. And and then, it makes us reflect on our own biases, right? So, we didn't grow up in the South in the 1930s, all right, but we grew up in the United States. I grew up in the Northeast, and so not everything was perfect. And so it made me. What are my biases? The what are the things that I'm saying that are hurtful, right? And uh, not that I changed overnight, but it stopped me. And obviously with maturity, I did change, and but going through this journey with Scout is pretty incredible. And, I looked at two things that, are not necessarily overt in the book. And if you read it a while ago, you may not remember it. But I think it's important to remember because Scout is getting all these experiences, but she's also seeing at a young age the hypocrisy. And so there's two things I want to point out is number one is Scout's in school and Miss Gates is her teacher. She started a new school year, and Miss Gates is having everyone, come up and talk about a current event. And so one boy talks about Adolf Hitler's rise. It's 1935, so he's been in power for a couple years, and his persecution of the Jews, and uh, what he's doing there. And Miss Gates, all right, the teacher, she says, and I want to quote here. They're, talking about the Jews, that there are no better people in the world than Jews. They contribute to every society that they live in and are deeply religious. And so then she goes on, she expands is that, hey, Hitler is persecuting them because he's a dictator in a dictatorship. And this would never happen in a democracy because democracies don't persecute people. And so, Scout's like, scratching her head like, well, wait a second here. And then later, she sees Miss Gates coming out of the courthouse, and Miss Gates is talking disparagingly of African Americans, and then even mentions that one day African Americans will want to marry white people. And so Scout is, it's very clear to her. And to me, as a reader, as a young person, it was very clear. And again, it created a framework for later. So when I'm learning about world religions, when I'm learning about uh, the way different people live. It's, Scout's journey that I took with her helped that. And then the other one, it's amazing, is it's the inclusion. Harper Lee included a fictional African tribe called the Maruna people. And so they're benighted people, according to, Aunt Alexandria. So Aunt Alexandria, Scout's aunt, has a group of ladies that she goes to church with that meet up, and they're getting reports of the missionary work that's being done to bring light to the Maruna people, because the Maruna people is a clan. They have communal living. There's initiation ceremonies. There is women are separated when they have their menstruation, and so the answer is prayer, giving money to them, and then hopefully converting them to Christianity. And so then Scout sees the hypocrisy. It's like, you're very concerned about the Maruna people, but you're not concerned about the African Americans who you live and work among. And so uh, people, in the blacks in Macomb County are Christian. They worship the same God that Aunt Alexandra and her group represents. And so the disconnect there. And so hypocrisy exists everywhere. And so this work gave me a great framework for the future. So, as you learn history, and it's important, right? Literature is wonderful, but, it should be coupled with history. And, when you learn about religions and people of the world, I think this book is very equipped to provide a framework to help with that. So, yeah, it's
Yeah,
amazing.
it is. And I think, like, because Harper Lee chose, a 6 to 8-year-old child,
Yeah.
to kind of as the mouthpiece to kind of tell some hard
Yeah.
truths. The way that kids naturally, the emperor has no clothes.
Right.
It's a child that can point that out because they don't feel like they have anything to lose by
Right.
saying the truth.
Yeah.
Um, I felt like the J. Everett Grimes, the missionary, I hadn't
Yeah.
even remembered him
Right.
until I read the book again. And I'm like, "Oh, white savior complex much?"
Right.
You know,
Yeah.
that immediately popped into my mind. And, um, Aunt Alexandra, I don't admire her as a parent
Mhm.
at all.
Yeah.
But, and I think Atticus was actually a pretty good parent. He
Yeah.
seems very laissez-faire as a
Yeah.
parent, but his kid knew how to read before she started 1st grade, so
Right.
he must have
Yeah.
been doing something right.
Yeah.
Um, but Aunt Alexandra is much more harsh, and, she doesn't like it that Scout is a quote unquote tomboy. I don't know what
Yeah.
we say nowadays, but
Right.
that would
Yeah.
have been what she was called back then.
Right.
That she liked to play in the dirt and had her overalls and did stuff with her
Yeah.
brother. But I do think that Aunt Alexandra deserves a little bit of credit because Atticus thought that his public
Right.
excuse me. Atticus thought that his public confrontation with Ewell was over and had diffused the situation. But Aunt Alexandra had a sense that he was gonna come after Atticus again, and he
Yeah.
does through Atticus's kids.
Right.
So I wanna give her a little bit of credit
Yeah.
just for that, not for much else.
Yeah. And also at the end, to give her a little bit more credit, I don't know exactly, but when the sheriff was there and Arthur Boo Radley was at the house, she understood, hey, this is a time for comfort, and this is a time that how can I support Atticus, right? So
Yeah.
she loved her brother. She was tied. I think she probably had a realization that, hey, change is going to be slow, and I need to prepare, my niece and nephew for, the world that they're going to live in, right? And as I mentioned, change is it's plate tectonics, and so yeah, but and then also the one person we didn't mention, the one who is Atticus is great, but Calpurnia, right? So Calpurnia lived with the children. I would go home at night, but Atticus is, busy with his law practice, and she's raising the kids, and she's providing, a moral example as well. She invites them to the church. That's a wonderful scene, and so that education. So Calpurnia is a hero
Yeah.
in this, and so I think in Alexandria, if I remember, they knew the trial was going to be there. They wanted to make sure that there was family there as well. Caperni would be busy, helping Helen, Tom's wife. And so yeah, so Calpurnia is a wonderful story too, and so, having that, right, and, again, it's privilege having someone in your home, that's doing the cooking and the cleaning and raising the children. I think, there's a commentary there, but, I think that helped, see the kids to see, a wonderful example and, of a great, woman who is, gonna be important to their future formation.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
And I remember noting, like, they ask her why she talked differently to people when they go to the church,
Yeah.
when she's around other Black people. And I'm like, oh, she's code switching,
Yeah, yeah, yeah,
because I
yep,
thought that
exactly.
was really great.
Right, yeah,
Yeah.
so yeah, because I remember Scout was, "Wait a second, how come you talk differently, when, you're at the church and then here?" And, yeah, yeah, it's and so again, when I'm 7, I don't know code switching, but I have the concept in my head, and so when you're introduced to the term and you go deeper in it, your mind always goes back to Calpurnia. So, at least mine does, right? So
Yeah. So we're going to wrap up. So, what is one concrete lesson from To Kill a Mockingbird that you believe is the most relevant today as we continue to grapple with these issues of racial equity?
right. Uh, that's a hard question because there's so many lessons that this book is prepared to provide the reader. And but I was thinking about this, and again, it goes back to courage, personal courage. And so, not sure if I mentioned this earlier. Obviously, in the army, they talked about army values and then the personal courage, right? And so, uh, and so one thing I want to talk about, just a few examples of personal courage in here, is obviously Atticus Finch. Didn't want the assignment, but when they got it, a vigorous defense that he would uh, give to a white person. All right, Boo Radley, who was isolated and fearful, right, and probably abused, right. He was shut in his house. All right, he has the courage to somehow befriend the children in small ways, and then ultimately he saves their life. Scout. The one thing we didn't mention is she diffuses the mob by making it personal. By I think it was Mr. Cuttingham saying, "Mr. Cuttingham, I know your son. He was over at our house, and tell him I said hey." And that personalized it, and made him think, "Hey, these are children. I'm seeing it through the eyes of a child, and so I came here to kill Tom Robinson." And Mr. Cunningham dispersed that mob. And then Miss DeBose, she's the one who, uh, defeated her opiate addiction. All right, she was going to die anyway, so you're thinking just take the painkillers, right? But she had the personal courage that she didn't want to be shackled with an addiction before she died. And then Sheriff Heck Tate, all right, again, choosing to have compassion to Arthur Radley, as opposed to, bringing charges, even though he would maybe found guilty, I mean, find innocent of, of murder. But sheriffs have incredible power, right? Even today, I can imagine sheriffs in small towns, what they investigate, who they pursue, they have probably a huge wide latitude on what they do. And so, but he showed courage at the end. He even admitted, "I'm not a great man, but this is my decision and this is final." And Miss Maudie, she consistently spoke the truth about the racism that was in Macomb. She was a woman, so obviously she didn't have the agency to impact change, much change, but she was impactful to the children. And but the one thing, all these people that displayed courage that I mentioned, are, they're all flawed, but they're all white. And Naomi, the reason why I think that's important is, uh, to challenge racial inequalities, to look at policies and procedures and laws that have an impact on a negative impact on minorities. The responsibility to change that is those in the majority, not the minority. That they're the ones with the power, and so it's still to this day a valuable lesson to me. And so to me, again, the lesson is personal courage to be able to uh, face controversy, to possibly lose a job, to lose status in the community. Very hard, but that's the message that got through to me.
That's a great message. And I think I will not add any additional comments because I really love that. I just it's so resonant today,
Yeah,
and as we go
yeah,
forward. So thank you, Dave, for all of your insights and for just having this conversation for me. Thank you for being my first guest.
yeah.
That's awesome. Um, we are going to conclude this episode. The next installment, which will be in a couple of weeks, is going to look at Fahrenheit 451.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's a great
And
yeah,
I'm
it's a great one. Yeah.
yeah, it's a really good one, so we're going to talk about banned books in a whole different way. And so I'm going to sign off with the quote from Isaac Asimov that any book worth banning is a book worth reading. Thanks
Awesome.
again.
Yeah, thank you. I had a wonderful time and best of luck with Book and Band. I'm glad I was able to be your first guest.
Thank you.
Booked and banned and bound by pages, stories hiding through the ages, whispered truths that still ring clear for those who choose to listen here. Booked and banned, we take a stand, turning words into common ground. Booked and banned, come take my hand, we're rebels with a paper